You know how some people say family is everything? That blood is thicker than water? Well, let me tell you about the day I proved that money is thicker than both. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how my own sister tormented me for years while my parents watched and did nothing, until I became successful enough to buy the one thing she wanted most in this world, just so I could give it to complete strangers. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I was the younger brother who never seemed to measure up. My sister Rebecca was 3 years older, and from the moment I could walk, she made it her personal mission to remind me that I was nothing more than an accident that ruined her perfect family dynamic. Rebecca wasn't just your typical older sister who occasionally picked on her little brother. She was calculated, cruel, and worst of all, she was smart about it. She knew exactly how to hurt me in ways that would never leave visible marks, never cross the line enough for our parents to take serious action. It started small when I was around 6 years old. Rebecca would hide my favorite toys, then help me look for them while secretly knowing exactly where they were hidden. She'd watch me cry and get frustrated, offering fake comfort while enjoying every second of my distress. When I'd finally give up searching, she'd miraculously find the toy in some obvious place, making me look stupid and forgetful. But as we got older, her tactics became more sophisticated and infinitely more damaging. In middle school, Rebecca discovered that she could use social manipulation as a weapon. She was popular, charismatic, and had this ability to make people believe whatever version of reality she wanted to present. When I'd complained to our parents about something she'd done, she'd already planted seeds of doubt about my credibility. "Marcus has been acting weird lately," she'd mentioned casually at dinner the day before I planned to tell them about something she'd done. "I think he might be making up stories for attention. You know how he gets when he feels left out." Our parents, David and Patricia Hoffman, were both successful professionals who worked long hours. Dad was a corporate lawyer, Mom was a pediatric surgeon. They loved us, but they were exhausted most of the time and relied heavily on Rebecca's version of events since she was older and seemed more mature and reliable. The psychological warfare Rebecca waged against me was relentless. She'd go through my room when I wasn't home, not to steal anything, but to move things just slightly. She'd rotate picture frames, rearrange my desk, move my clothes to different drawers. Nothing dramatic enough to be obvious, but enough to make me feel like I was losing my mind. When I'd mention that someone had been in my room, she'd look at me with this perfectly crafted expression of concern and say, "Marcus, nobody's been in your room. Are you feeling okay? You've been saying a lot of strange things lately." The worst part was watching our parents' reactions. They'd exchange those looks, the kind parents give each other when they're worried about their child's mental state. Rebecca had positioned herself as the reliable, concerned older sister, while I became the problematic younger brother who couldn't be trusted to tell the truth. High school brought new opportunities for Rebecca to make my life miserable. She was a junior when I was a freshman, which meant she had social influence I couldn't compete with. She never directly told people to avoid me or treat me badly. She was far too clever for such obvious tactics. Instead, she'd spread just enough doubt about my character to make people wary of getting close to me. She'd mention to her friends, loud enough for others to hear, how worried she was about my episodes at home. She'd talk about how I'd been acting out and how concerned our parents were about my behavior. "I love my little brother so much," she'd say with perfectly manufactured sincerity, "but sometimes I worry about him. He gets these moods, you know? And he says things that aren't true. I just hope he gets the help he needs." The genius of Rebecca's approach was that she never technically lied about specific events. She just created an atmosphere of uncertainty around my credibility that made it nearly impossible for me to defend myself or build genuine friendships. When I tried to join the debate team, Rebecca mentioned to her friend Sarah, who happened to be the debate coach's daughter, that she was worried about how I might react to losing. "He doesn't handle criticism well," she said, "and sometimes he makes up elaborate stories when things don't go his way." I didn't make the team. When I asked Jessica Martinez to the sophomore dance, Rebecca had already planted seeds with Jessica's older sister about my reputation for being dramatic and unreliable. Jessica turned me down, and I later overheard her telling her friends she'd heard I was kind of unstable. The most devastating incident happened during my junior year. I had finally found a group of friends who seemed to accept me, guys from the computer programming club who shared my interest in technology. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Rebecca couldn't let that stand. She began dating Trevor, one of the senior guys who was friends with several members of the programming club. Through Trevor, she gained access to information about our group dynamics, our inside jokes, our plans. She used this information to subtly sabotage my relationships within the group. She'd mentioned to Trevor, knowing he'd repeat it, how I'd been bragging at home about being so much smarter than my friends in the programming club. She'd talk about how I'd made fun of their coding skills and called them amateurs behind their backs. None of this was true, but Rebecca's reputation for being trustworthy meant that when these rumors made their way back to my friends, they believed them. The group that had once welcomed me began to view me with suspicion and resentment. When I tried to defend myself, explaining that I'd never said any such things, my friends looked at me the same way my parents did, with that mixture of pity and concern that suggested they thought I was either lying or delusional. "Dude, Trevor heard it directly from your own sister," my friend Kevin told me. "Why would she lie about her own brother?" I lost the only real friendships I'd managed to build in high school. The isolation was crushing, but what hurt even more was the realization that Rebecca had orchestrated the entire situation with surgical precision. Throughout all of this, whenever I tried to confront Rebecca directly, she'd respond with perfect innocence. "Marcus, I would never try to hurt you. You're my little brother, and I love you. I'm worried that you're starting to blame me for problems that might be coming from somewhere else. Maybe we should talk to Mom and Dad about getting you someone to talk to." That phrase, "getting you someone to talk to," became Rebecca's favorite weapon. Anytime I accused her of anything, she'd suggest that I needed therapy, that I was having trouble distinguishing reality from paranoid fantasies. Our parents, already primed by years of Rebecca's subtle manipulation, began to seriously consider that I might need professional help. The irony was devastating. The person who was systematically destroying my mental health was positioning herself as the concerned family member trying to get me help. The breaking point came during my senior year. I had been accepted to Oregon State University with a partial scholarship for computer science. It wasn't Harvard, but it was a good school, and I was proud of the achievement. For once, I had something that Rebecca couldn't take away from me. Or so I thought. 2 weeks before graduation, I received a letter from the university informing me that there had been concerns raised about my character and fitness for the program, and that they were reconsidering my admission and scholarship. The letter mentioned that they had received information suggesting I had engaged in plagiarism and had problems with anger management and truthfulness. They requested a meeting to discuss these allegations before finalizing my enrollment. I was devastated and confused. I had never plagiarized anything, and while I'd certainly been angry plenty of times, usually because of Rebecca's treatment, I'd never had any disciplinary issues at school. It took me 3 days of investigation to discover what had happened. Rebecca had found out that Mrs. Chen, my AP computer science teacher, was married to a professor in OSU's computer science department. Through a carefully constructed story about being worried about her unstable brother who might be dangerous around other students, Rebecca had convinced Mrs. Chen to reach out to her husband with concerns about my character. Rebecca had provided evidence of my instability, stories about my paranoid accusations against her, my history of making up elaborate lies, my concerning behavior at home that had our parents worried. She even showed Mrs. Chen some text messages I'd sent her during our arguments, taking them completely out of context to make me appear threatening and unhinged. Mrs. Chen, believing she was protecting other students from a potentially dangerous individual, had passed these concerns along to her husband, who initiated the review of my admission. When I finally uncovered the truth and confronted Rebecca, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about, Marcus. I think you're having another one of your episodes. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that worries me about you." The meeting at Oregon State University was scheduled for a Thursday morning in June. I sat across from Dr. Williams, the department head, and Professor Chen, feeling like I was on trial for crimes I didn't commit. They had a manila folder thick with evidence of my supposed character flaws. "Marcus," Dr. Williams began, adjusting his glasses, "we've received some troubling information about incidents of academic dishonesty and concerning behavior patterns. Your sister contacted us because she was worried about other students' safety." My sister. Even here, hundreds of miles from home, Rebecca's poison had reached me. I spent 2 hours defending myself, explaining the context behind every misinterpreted text message, every twisted story. I could see the skepticism in their eyes. After all, why would a sister lie about her own brother? By the end of the meeting, I had managed to keep my admission, but my scholarship was reduced by half. The university wanted to monitor my progress closely during my first year. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That night, I called home. When my mother answered, I tried to explain what had happened, how Rebecca had sabotaged my future. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how they sounded. "Marcus, honey," Mom said with that familiar tone of strained patience. "Rebecca loves you. She's worried about you. We all are. Maybe this is a sign that you need to take responsibility for your actions instead of always blaming others." That conversation was the moment I realized I was truly alone. My own parents had chosen to believe Rebecca's carefully crafted narrative over their own son's desperate pleas for help. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. I arrived at Oregon State that fall with $847 in my checking account, a used laptop that barely functioned, and a rage that I had learned to hide behind a quiet, unremarkable exterior. While other freshmen were making friends and joining clubs, I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover my reduced scholarship gap. I delivered pizzas until 2 a.m., tutored struggling students in computer programming, and cleaned office buildings on weekends. My grades suffered initially, not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I was exhausted and emotionally hollowed out. But something happened during those long, lonely months. The combination of isolation and financial pressure forced me to develop a different kind of strength. I stopped expecting anyone to help me or believe in me. I stopped caring what people thought about my character or my story. I focused entirely on building skills that no one could take away from me. I spent every free moment learning programming languages, studying cybersecurity, diving deep into emerging technologies. While my classmates partied on weekends, I was in the computer lab until security kicked me out. While they slept in on Sunday mornings, I was building websites for local businesses, charging just enough to cover my expenses. By sophomore year, my reputation on campus had shifted. I wasn't the friendly social guy who made easy connections. Rebecca had poisoned that well years ago. Instead, I became known as the quiet, intense guy who could solve any technical problem. Professors started recommending me for freelance projects. Students began paying me to fix their computers and help with coding assignments. The money was small at first, $50 here, $100 there. But I saved every penny, living on ramen noodles and generic cereal, wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation. My classmates probably thought I was poor, which was true, but they didn't understand that poverty had become my fuel. During winter break of my sophomore year, I made the mistake of going home to Portland. Rebecca was there, of course, home from Portland State University, where she was studying communications and thriving socially just as she always had. The family dynamic hadn't changed at all. Rebecca was still the golden child, full of stories about her internship at a local PR firm and her active social life. Our parents hung on her every word, asking follow-up questions, laughing at her anecdotes. When they asked about my college experience, I kept my answers brief. I didn't mention the jobs, the late nights, the slowly growing bank account. I certainly didn't mention that I had started developing software applications that were beginning to generate real income. But Rebecca's radar for my success was finely tuned. She sensed something different about me, some quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. During dinner on my 3rd night home, she made her move. "You know, Marcus seems different," she said, addressing our parents as if I wasn't sitting right there. "More secretive. I'm worried he might be involved in something illegal. You know how computer people can get mixed up in hacking and identity theft." The familiar knot formed in my stomach, but this time it was accompanied by something new, a cold, calculating fury that I had never felt before. "That's an interesting theory, Rebecca," I said quietly. "What makes you think that?" She looked surprised. I had never pushed back so directly before. "Well, you're just different, quieter, and you seem to have money for things now. Where's that coming from?" Our parents were watching this exchange with obvious discomfort. Dad cleared his throat. "Marcus, son, if you're having financial difficulties, we've told you that you can always ask for help." "I'm not having financial difficulties," I replied, still looking directly at Rebecca. "I've been working and building skills. Some people call it taking responsibility for your actions." Quote. The phrase hung in the air, the same words Mom had used on the phone when I tried to explain what Rebecca had done to my scholarship. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. She recognized the challenge. "I'm just concerned about you, Marcus. We all are. You used to be more open with the family. Now you're secretive and defensive. It reminds me of how you acted in high school when you were having those problems with reality." There it was. The same playbook, the same manipulation, but this time I was ready for it. "You're right, Rebecca, I have changed. I've learned not to trust people who smile while they're stabbing you in the back. I've learned that family doesn't always mean what people pretend it means. And I've learned that the best way to deal with bullies is to become stronger than they are." The room went dead silent. Dad set down his fork. "Marcus, that's enough. Rebecca is your sister, and she loves you. We don't talk to family that way in this house." I looked around the table at these three people who shared my DNA but had never really known me, never really protected me, never really believed in me. "You're absolutely right, Dad. We don't talk to family that way in this house. We do much worse things to family in this house. We just do them quietly and with a smile." I left that night, 2 days earlier than planned. As I drove back to Oregon State, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the victim in Rebecca's story. It was time to start writing my own. Back at school, I threw myself into my work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I took on every freelance project I could find, sometimes working 18-hour days. I learned new programming languages, studied market trends, analyzed successful startups. By the end of sophomore year, I had $12,000 in savings and a growing reputation in the local tech community. By junior year, that number had grown to $35,000, and I had developed 2 mobile applications that were generating steady monthly income. My professor started recommending me for internships at major tech companies. Unlike most students, I didn't need these internships for the experience. I was already getting that through my freelance work. I needed them for the connections and the credibility. The summer internship at Intel changed everything. I wasn't just another college student learning the ropes. I was a problem solver who could contribute immediately. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, was impressed enough to offer me a full-time position after graduation, with a starting salary that was higher than most entry-level positions. But I had bigger plans. During my senior year, I partnered with 2 other students to develop a cybersecurity application that we launched as a startup. While my partners focused on the technical development, I handled the business side, something I had learned through necessity during all those years of freelance work. Our application caught the attention of several major corporations who were dealing with increasing cyber threats. Within 6 months of launching, we had our first major client contract worth $200,000. I graduated with a 3.8 GPA, multiple job offers, and a growing business that was already generating 6-figure revenue. More importantly, I graduated with something I had never had before: genuine confidence in my own abilities and complete independence from my family's opinion of me. The day after graduation, I signed the paperwork to sell my share of the startup to my partners for $400,000. They thought I was crazy to give up the potential long-term value, but I had a different plan. I was going to show Rebecca what real power looked like. Moving to Seattle was the smartest decision I ever made. With $400,000 from the startup sale and a job offer from Amazon, I was finally ready to build the life I wanted, far away from Portland and the toxic family dynamics that had defined my first 22 years. My apartment in Capitol Hill was small but modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was entirely mine. No one rearranging my belongings, no one planting seeds of doubt about my sanity, no one undermining my achievements. The work at Amazon was challenging but rewarding. I was part of a team developing cloud security solutions, and my combination of technical skills and business acumen quickly caught the attention of senior management. Within 6 months, I was promoted to senior software engineer with a salary increase that pushed my annual income above $180,000. But the real money came from my side projects. During evenings and weekends, I developed custom software solutions for small and medium-sized businesses. Word of mouth in Seattle's tight-knit tech community meant I was constantly turning down projects because I couldn't handle the demand. I lived modestly, saving and investing aggressively. My colleagues probably thought I was some kind of ascetic monk. I drove a used Honda Civic, wore the same rotation of clothes, and brought lunch from home every day. What they didn't know was that every dollar I saved was ammunition for a war. One had been planning since that winter break confrontation. 2 years into my Seattle life, I received a call from my mother that changed everything. "Marcus, honey, I have wonderful news," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Rebecca is engaged. She's marrying Todd Wellington. You remember the Wellington family from the country club? His father owns those commercial real estate developments around Portland." Todd Wellington, I remembered him vaguely from high school. A few years older than Rebecca, decent looking, from old Portland money. The kind of guy who had never worked a day in his life but somehow always had access to unlimited resources. "That's great, Mom," I said neutrally. "I'm happy for her." "Oh, and Marcus, you'll never guess what Todd is giving her as an engagement present. He's buying her that gorgeous Victorian house on Elm Street in the Pearl District. You know, the one she's been obsessing over since she was in high school? She used to walk by it every day and talk about how she'd live there someday." My blood went cold. I knew exactly which house she meant. The Hartwell Victorian at 847 Elm Street was a stunning 3-story home, built in 1892, with intricate woodwork, original stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch that belonged on a postcard. The house sat on a quarter-acre lot in one of Portland's most prestigious neighborhoods, and it had been Rebecca's dream home for as long as I could remember. She used to drag me past that house when we were kids, spinning elaborate fantasies about how she would redecorate each room, what kind of garden she would plant, how she would host elegant dinner parties on the veranda. Even as a child, I could see how the house represented everything Rebecca wanted: status, beauty, recognition, the perfect backdrop for the perfect life she believed she deserved. "The current owners are asking $2.8 million, Mom continued, but Todd doesn't care about the price. He says nothing is too good for his future wife." Isn't that romantic? After I hung up, I sat in my apartment staring out at the Seattle skyline, processing what I had just learned. Rebecca was about to get everything she had ever wanted. The perfect husband, the perfect house, the perfect life. Meanwhile, our parents would continue to celebrate her achievements while treating my success as if it were somehow suspicious or undeserved. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that house, and about how Rebecca's face would light up when she walked through those rooms for the first time as the owner. I thought about the Instagram post she would make, showing off her perfect life to the world. I thought about how our parents would gush over her good fortune and her ability to marry well. Then I had an idea that was so perfectly vindictive, so elegantly cruel, that it made me smile for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I called a real estate agent in Portland. "Hi, I'm interested in making an offer on a property in the Pearl District, 847 Elm Street. I understand it's currently listed at $2.8 million, but I'd like to make a cash offer of $3.2 million with a 2-week closing period." The agent, Linda Patterson, was stunned. Cash offers of that size weren't common, especially from someone calling from out of state. "Mr. Hoffman, I have to ask, have you actually seen the property? This is a significant investment, and while it's a beautiful home, making an offer sight unseen is unusual." "I'm familiar with the property," I said. "I grew up in Portland, and I'm very motivated to close quickly. Will the sellers accept those terms?" Within 24 hours, I had my answer. The sellers, an elderly couple who had been trying to sell for 8 months, jumped at the offer. They agreed to my terms with the condition that I could pass the financial verification process. That was the easy part. My bank statements, investment accounts, and employment verification painted a picture of someone who could easily afford a $3.2 million home purchase. The loan officer at my credit union was impressed by my financial profile and approved the transaction without hesitation. 2 weeks later, I was the owner of 847 Elm Street. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the purchase. As far as they knew, I was still the struggling younger son living paycheck to paycheck in Seattle. I planned to keep it that way until the perfect moment. The timing couldn't have been better. According to Mom's subsequent phone calls, Todd and Rebecca had been planning to make their offer the following week. When they contacted the listing agent, they were told the property had already been sold to a cash buyer. Rebecca was devastated. She cried for hours, Mom told me during one of our monthly check-ins. That house meant everything to her, Marcus. Todd is trying to find something comparable, but you know how unique that Victorian was? Rebecca says it's like losing a piece of her soul. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while privately savoring every word. But owning the house was only the first step in my plan. The real genius was in what I did next. I hired a property management company called Pacific Northwest Rentals to handle the day-to-day operations. I told them I was an investor living out of state who wanted to rent the property to carefully screened tenants. The house was in perfect condition. The previous owners had maintained it beautifully, so it was ready for immediate occupancy. Within a month, I had tenants. Jake and Maria Santos, a young couple in their late 20s. Jake was a graphic designer, Maria was a social worker. They were exactly the kind of people Rebecca would consider beneath her. Hardworking, middle-class professionals who appreciated the house's beauty but didn't have the social connections or family wealth that Rebecca valued. I charged them $4,200 per month in rent, which was actually below market rate for a house of that caliber in that neighborhood. Jake and Maria were thrilled to find such an incredible place at a price they could afford. They treated the house with respect and genuine appreciation, something that gave me more satisfaction than I had expected. The best part was watching the ripple effects of my decision play out through family conversations. Todd had tried to find Rebecca another Victorian in the same neighborhood, but there was nothing comparable available. They looked at new construction, at modern mansions, at historic homes in other parts of the city. Nothing satisfied Rebecca the way that Elm Street house had. She drives by it sometimes, Mom told me during a phone call in December, just to look at it. She says it breaks her heart to see strangers living in her dream home. Todd feels terrible that he couldn't get it for her. The wedding planning became stressful because Rebecca couldn't find the perfect venue that would complement the perfect house she no longer had. She became increasingly difficult to please, increasingly focused on what she had lost rather than what she was gaining. Meanwhile, I was thriving in Seattle. My work at Amazon continued to excel. I had been promoted again with another significant salary increase, and my freelance business was generating more money than I could have imagined. I was investing heavily in real estate and technology stocks, building wealth at a pace that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money or the career success. It was the knowledge that for the first time in my life, I had taken something Rebecca wanted and made it impossible for her to have it. After years of her taking away my opportunities, my friendships, my credibility, and my peace of mind, I had finally found a way to return the favor. The house on Elm Street wasn't just a real estate investment. It was proof that I had become someone who couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or manipulated. Rebecca's dream home was now my property, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. And I was just getting started. The wedding invitation arrived on expensive cardstock with gold embossing, addressed to Mr. Marcus Hoffman and guest. Rebecca had chosen the Multnomah Athletic Club for the venue, old Portland money at its finest. As I held the invitation, I realized this would be the perfect opportunity to reveal my little secret about the Elm Street property. But first, I had some preparations to make. I flew to Portland 3 days before the wedding and checked into the Heathman Hotel downtown. My first stop was to drive by 847 Elm Street and see how Jake and Maria were settling in. The house looked magnificent. They had put up tasteful Christmas decorations, the garden was well maintained, and there was a warm glow coming from the windows that made the whole property look like something from a magazine. I parked across the street and watched Jake arrive home from work, carrying groceries and whistling as he walked up the front steps. Through the large front windows, I could see Maria arranging flowers in what used to be called the morning room. They looked happy, settled, completely unaware that their landlord was sitting 50 feet away planning psychological warfare against his own sister. That evening, I had dinner with my parents at their house in Lake Oswego. Rebecca was there with Todd, along with his parents, Charles and Margaret Wellington. The Wellingtons were exactly what I had expected. Old money Portland aristocracy, who spoke in carefully modulated tones about their various charitable foundations and country club activities. Rebecca looked stunning, as always. She had that glow that brides-to-be are supposed to have, but I could see the tension around her eyes when the conversation inevitably turned to housing. "We're still looking for the perfect home," Todd was explaining to my parents. "Rebecca has very specific tastes, and she knows exactly what she wants. We've made offers on several properties, but nothing has felt quite right." "Tell them about the Victorian," Margaret Wellington said with a sympathetic smile. "The one that got away." Rebecca's expression darkened slightly. "There was this incredible house in the Pearl District. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. A genuine 1892 Victorian with all the original details intact. We were going to make an offer, but someone beat us to it with a cash purchase." "Some out-of-state investor, apparently," Todd added, his tone carrying just a hint of resentment. "Probably someone who's never even seen the house. They'll probably just rent it out to whoever pays the most." I took a sip of wine and made a sympathetic noise. "That's terrible. The housing market is so competitive these days." Rebecca looked at me with surprise. It was the first time I had voluntarily contributed to a conversation since arriving. "You wouldn't understand, Marcus," she said with a slight edge to her voice. "You've never cared about things like architectural history or creating a beautiful home. Some of us have higher aspirations than just getting by." There it was. The same dismissive tone, the same casual cruelty disguised as sisterly observation. But this time, I had ammunition. "You're absolutely right, Rebecca. I've always been more practical about real estate. I tend to think of properties as investments rather than emotional attachments." Charles Wellington leaned forward with interest. "Are you in real estate, Marcus? Todd mentioned you work in technology." "I do work in tech, but I've been investing in real estate on the side. Nothing as grand as what Rebecca is looking for, of course. Just small properties that generate steady rental income." Rebecca wasn't paying attention to this part of the conversation. She was scrolling through her phone, probably looking at house listings again. But Todd was listening, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. "What kind of properties?" Todd asked. "Residential? Commercial?" "Mostly residential. Single-family homes in good neighborhoods. I look for places with historical significance that will hold their value. Victorian houses, for example, can be excellent investments if you find the right one." Now I had Rebecca's attention. She looked up from her phone with a sharp expression. "Like I said, Marcus, some people see houses as homes, and others see them as profit margins. It's a fundamental difference in how we approach life." I nodded thoughtfully. "You're probably right. Although I have to admit, there's something satisfying about owning a piece of history, especially when you can find tenants who really appreciate the craftsmanship and character of an older home." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed Rebecca checking her phone more frequently throughout the evening. Something about my comments had unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. The wedding ceremony was held at the Portland Art Museum, with the reception following at the Multnomah Athletic Club. Rebecca looked absolutely radiant in her designer gown, and Todd seemed genuinely happy and proud. For a moment, watching them exchange vows, I almost felt bad about what I was planning to do. Almost. The reception was elegant and perfectly orchestrated. Rebecca had always been good at creating beautiful events, and this was her masterpiece. The flowers were arranged by Portland's most exclusive florist, the menu had been designed by a James Beard award-winning chef, and the guest list included the cream of Portland society. I sat at a table with some college friends of Todd's, making polite conversation and waiting for the right moment. That moment came during the father of the bride's speech. My father stood up, champagne glass in hand, and began talking about how proud he was of Rebecca, how she had always known what she wanted, and gone after it with determination and grace. He talked about her intelligence, her social skills, her ability to bring people together. Rebecca has always had impeccable taste, he said, raising his glass toward the head table. Whether it's choosing the perfect husband, planning the perfect wedding, or dreaming about the perfect home, she sees beauty where others might see just another house or just another opportunity. That's a gift. Quote, the crowd murmured their approval and raised their glasses. Rebecca was glowing with happiness and pride. That's when I made my move. During the applause, I stood up and walked toward the head table. Rebecca saw me approaching and looked puzzled. This wasn't part of the planned program. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, but Dad's speech reminded me of something I wanted to share with Rebecca and Todd. Rebecca looked confused but smiled politely. Todd nodded encouragingly. Dad mentioned Rebecca's perfect taste in homes, and it made me think about that Victorian house she was telling me about earlier, the one on Elm Street that got away. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. She clearly didn't want to be reminded of her disappointment during her wedding reception. Marcus, this isn't really the time, she started to say. I know it was heartbreaking when someone else bought it, I continued. But I have some good news. I happen to know the new owner, and it turns out the house is being rented to a wonderful young couple who absolutely love it. They're taking great care of the property. The confused murmur from the surrounding tables was growing louder. People were trying to figure out why I was giving a speech about real estate during the reception. Rebecca's expression was shifting from confusion to annoyance. Marcus, I really don't think. In fact, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a folded document, I brought some photos that Jake and Maria, that's the couple renting it, sent me last week. They're so proud of how they've decorated for Christmas. I unfolded the photos and handed them to Rebecca. Her hands were shaking slightly as she looked at images of her dream house, decorated for the holidays by strangers. How do you know these people? Todd asked, clearly bewildered by the entire situation. I smiled and looked directly at Rebecca, whose face had gone completely pale. I know them because I'm their landlord. I bought 847 Elm Street 3 months ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock, rage, and something that might have been fear. Todd was the first to speak. You bought Rebecca's house. I bought a house that was for sale, I corrected. It's a beautiful property, and it made sense as an investment. I had no idea Rebecca was interested in it until after the purchase was complete. Quote, that was a lie, of course, but it was delivered with perfect sincerity. Rebecca finally found her voice. You knew, she whispered. You knew how much that house meant to me. I looked at her with genuine puzzlement. Rebecca, how could I have known? We barely talk, and when we do, you usually make it clear that my opinions and interests don't matter to you. I had no idea you were looking at real estate in Portland. The logic was unassailable, which made it even more devastating. Rebecca couldn't accuse me of deliberately sabotaging her without admitting that we had a relationship close enough for me to know her private hopes and dreams. But we both knew the truth. Margaret Wellington cleared her throat uncomfortably. Well, this is certainly unexpected. I hope there are no hard feelings, I said, addressing Todd and Rebecca with apparent sincerity. If you're ever in the market for rental property, I'd be happy to discuss terms. Jake and Maria's lease is up for renewal next year. Rebecca stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me, she said in a strangled voice, and walked quickly toward the ladies' room. Todd looked around the table helplessly, then followed her. I returned to my seat, leaving behind a wake of confused whispers and uncomfortable glances. My parents were staring at me from across the room with expressions of complete bewilderment. 20 minutes later, Rebecca returned to the reception, her makeup freshly applied and her composure restored. She danced with her new husband, smiled for photos, and played the role of the happy bride for the rest of the evening. But I noticed that she avoided looking in my direction for the remainder of the night. And when I checked my phone the next morning, I had 17 missed calls from my mother. The phone calls started at 6:47 a.m. I was back in my hotel room, enjoying my first cup of coffee and reading the news on my laptop when my mother's number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again, and again. By the time I finally answered on the fourth call, I could hear the strain in her voice. Marcus, what in God's name were you thinking last night? Rebecca has been crying since you left the reception. This is her wedding weekend, and you humiliated her in front of everyone. I took another sip of coffee and settled back in the hotel chair. Mom, I shared some good news about a real estate investment. I thought Rebecca would be happy to know that her favorite house is being well cared for. Don't play dumb with me, Marcus. You knew exactly what you were doing. How could you buy that house without telling us? And why would you bring it up at the wedding? The questions came rapid fire, tinged with the kind of maternal disappointment I hadn't heard since high school, but this time it felt different. This time, I had done something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I bought a house that was for sale, I said calmly. It's a good investment property in an excellent neighborhood. I'm not sure why that would upset anyone. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Marcus, honey, I know you've had your differences with Rebecca over the years, but this feels deliberate and cruel. For a moment, I almost laughed. After 25 years of watching Rebecca systematically undermine my relationships, my opportunities, and my reputation, while our parents stood by and enabled her behavior, my mother was concerned about cruelty. Mom, I understand that Rebecca is disappointed she couldn't buy the house she wanted, but the real estate market is competitive. These things happen. She says you knew how much that house meant to her. Rebecca says a lot of things about me that aren't true. You've never seemed particularly concerned about that before. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken tensions and willful blindness. Your father wants to speak with you, Mom finally said. We're driving over to the hotel. They arrived 45 minutes later, looking like they had aged 5 years overnight. Dad was still wearing his tuxedo pants from the wedding, paired with a hastily chosen polo shirt. Mom was in yesterday's dress, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. We sat in the hotel lobby, an awkward family meeting among the business travelers and tourists checking out for their Sunday flights. Son, Dad began, using his lawyer voice, we need to understand what happened here. This house purchase, when did you arrange it? How did you even know about the property? I had anticipated these questions and prepared accordingly. I've been investing in Portland real estate for about a year, I said. I work with a local agent who sends me listings for properties that match my investment criteria. Victorian houses in good neighborhoods have excellent rental potential and strong appreciation rates. Quote, it wasn't entirely a lie. I had been looking at Portland real estate, though not seriously until the moment I learned about Rebecca's engagement gift. But that specific house, Mom pressed, 847 Elm Street, how did you know about that one? Linda Patterson, my agent, flagged it as an exceptional opportunity. When I saw the listing photos and the location, I knew it would be a strong investment. I made a competitive cash offer and closed quickly. Dad was studying my expression the way he would examine a witness on the stand. Marcus, I've known you for 25 years. You're not typically impulsive about major financial decisions. This feels out of character. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do. The words hung in the air between us. Dad's expression shifted, and I could see him recognizing something he had probably been avoiding for years. What's that supposed to mean? Mom asked. It means I've been making my own decisions and building my own life for a long time now. Maybe if you had paid attention to what I was actually doing instead of always assuming Rebecca's version of events was true, this wouldn't come as such a surprise. That's not fair, Marcus, Dad said. We've always supported both of you equally. Have you? I asked. When Rebecca sabotaged my college scholarship, did you support me equally then? When she spread rumors about me in high school, did you investigate or did you just assume I was being paranoid? When I tried to tell you what she was doing to me, did you listen or did you send me to therapy because Rebecca convinced you I was unstable? My parents exchanged a look that confirmed everything I suspected. They remembered those incidents, but they had chosen to interpret them through Rebecca's narrative rather than consider that their golden child might be capable of systematic cruelty. Marcus, Mom said softly, if you felt that we weren't listening to you, we're sorry. But this isn't the way to handle old grievances. This is Rebecca's wedding weekend. You're right, I said, standing up. This is Rebecca's wedding weekend. And she got to marry a wealthy man who loves her, surrounded by family and friends who adore her, in a beautiful ceremony that probably cost more than most people make in a year. I'd say she had a pretty good weekend overall. But you ruined it by bringing up the house, Dad said. I shared information about my property investment. If that ruined Rebecca's wedding, maybe the problem isn't what I said. Maybe the problem is that Rebecca can't stand the idea of me having something she wants. I could see the recognition dawning in their eyes. For the first time, they were seeing the dynamic between Rebecca and me from a different angle. We should go, Mom said quietly. We need to check on Rebecca and Todd. After they left, I spent the rest of the morning walking around downtown Portland, thinking about the conversation and what it meant. For years, I had craved my parents' understanding and support. Now that I finally had their attention, I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I flew back to Seattle that afternoon, but the fallout from the wedding revelation was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, I received a series of increasingly desperate communications from various family members. Rebecca had apparently spent the first week of her honeymoon crying and obsessing over the house situation instead of enjoying her new marriage. Todd called me directly, which surprised me. Marcus, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, he said. I got your number from your parents. I wanted to talk about the Elm Street property. What about it? Well, she's having a really hard time with this. The house represented something important to her, and knowing that you own it is causing her a lot of distress. I was wondering if you might consider selling it to us. I had been expecting this call. Todd, I appreciate you reaching out, but the house isn't for sale. It's performing very well as a rental property, and I'm planning to hold it as a long-term investment. I understand it's a good investment, but we're prepared to offer significantly above what you paid. Money isn't the issue here. If money isn't the issue, then there are plenty of other beautiful houses in Portland. Some of them are probably even more impressive than mine. There was a pause. Marcus, can I be frank with you? Please. Rebecca told me about your relationship growing up. She says there were some difficulties between you two, some misunderstandings. She's worried that you bought this house specifically to hurt her. That's an interesting theory. What do you think? I think, Todd said carefully, that family relationships are complicated. And I think Rebecca might have done some things she regrets now. But she's my wife, and I love her, and I want her to be happy. Quote, it was the first time anyone in my family's orbit had acknowledged that Rebecca might have been the problem. I found myself almost liking Todd in that moment. I understand that, Todd, but my real estate investments aren't based on family dynamics. They're based on financial considerations. What if we offered you double what you paid? $6.4 million. For a house I had bought for $3.2 million just months earlier. That's a generous offer, I said, but the answer is still no. Triple? $9.6 million. The number was absurd, but Todd's desperation was exactly what I had been hoping to achieve. Todd, you could buy 10 houses for that amount of money. Beautiful houses that would make Rebecca happy. But not that house. Not the house she's dreamed about since she was a kid. No, I agreed, not that house. That house belongs to me now. After I hung up, I sat in my Seattle apartment, looking out at the city lights, feeling something I had never experienced before, complete and total power over someone who had controlled my life for decades. Rebecca wanted something, and I was the only person who could give it to her. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the cards. And I had no intention of playing them. 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected visitor at my Seattle office. Rebecca was standing in the lobby of the Amazon building when I came down for lunch, looking perfectly put together in an expensive coat and designer handbag. But I could see the strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her purse. Hello, Marcus, she said when she saw me approaching. I was hoping we could talk. I hadn't seen her since the wedding, though I had heard plenty about her through family phone calls. According to Mom, Rebecca's obsession with the Elm Street house had become all-consuming. She drove by it regularly, researched the rental market obsessively, and had even attempted to contact Jake and Maria directly before my property management company intervened. This is unexpected, I said. What brings you to Seattle? You know why I'm here. We found a quiet coffee shop a few blocks from my office. Rebecca ordered a latte she didn't touch, while I got a simple black coffee and waited for her to begin. "I know what you did," she said finally. "I know you bought that house specifically to hurt me." "That's quite an accusation. Do you have any proof?" Quote, "The timeline, Marcus. You made the offer the day after Mom told you about my engagement. You closed 2 weeks later, right before Todd and I were planning to make our offer. That's not a coincidence." She was right, of course, but being right and being able to prove it were different things. I saw a good investment opportunity and acted quickly. That's how real estate works. Rebecca leaned forward, her composure cracking slightly. "I'll give you anything you want for that house. Name your price." "It's not for sale." $10 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. The desperation in her voice was palpable. "Rebecca, even if I wanted to sell, which I don't, $10 million for a house worth $3 million would raise serious questions with the IRS. They'd assume money laundering or tax evasion." "Then what do you want?" Her voice was becoming shrill, drawing looks from other customers. "What will it take for you to stop torturing me?" "Torturing you?" I set down my coffee cup and looked at her with genuine curiosity. "Rebecca, I own a rental property that generates steady income and appreciates in value. My tenants are happy, the neighborhood is stable, and it's an excellent long-term investment. How is that torturing you?" "Because you know what that house means to me. And you know what my childhood meant to me, you know what my high school years meant to me, you know what my college scholarship meant to me. But that never stopped you from taking those things away." The words hung between us like a physical barrier. Rebecca's face went white. "That's what this is about? Things that happened when we were kids?" "Kids?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Rebecca, you sabotaged my college admission when you were 21 years old. You systematically destroyed my friendships and undermined my credibility for over a decade. You convinced our own parents that I was mentally unstable. When exactly did you stop being a kid and start being responsible for your actions?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her untouched latte. "I never meant for things to go that far," she said finally. "Yes, you did. Every single thing you did to me was calculated and deliberate. You knew exactly how much damage you were causing and you enjoyed it." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Remember when you sabotaged my relationship with the programming club? You spent weeks gathering information through Trevor, crafting the perfect lies to turn my friends against me. That wasn't a childhood prank, Rebecca. That was psychological warfare." She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks in a way that would have made me feel guilty just a few years earlier. "I was jealous," she whispered. "You were so smart, and everything came so easily to you. I felt like I had to compete for our parents' attention. So you decided to destroy me instead of trying to build yourself up. I made mistakes, I'm sorry, but this isn't who you are, Marcus. You're not cruel like this." I studied her face, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. She wasn't the powerful, manipulative force that had dominated my childhood. She was just a woman who had built her identity around always getting what she wanted, and now she was facing the reality that her actions had consequences. "You're right," I said. "I'm not naturally cruel. I had to learn it. Guess who my teacher was?" Rebecca wiped her eyes with a napkin, leaving streaks of mascara on the white paper. "What do you want from me, Marcus? Do you want me to apologize publicly? Do you want me to tell our parents what I did? Do you want me to pay you back somehow? Just tell me what it will take to end this." For a moment, I considered it. The idea of Rebecca confessing everything to our parents, of finally having my version of events validated, was tempting. But then I realized something that surprised me. "I don't want anything from you, Rebecca. This isn't about getting something from you. It's about you not getting something from me." "I don't understand." "For 25 years, you took things away from me whenever you felt like it. My friends, my opportunities, my reputation, my family's trust. You took those things because you could, because you had power over me and you enjoyed using it." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a calm that I hadn't experienced in years. "Now I have something you want, and you can't take it from me. You can't manipulate me into giving it to you. You can't turn our parents against me to force me to sell. You can't spread rumors or plant lies or undermine my credibility." For the first time in our relationship, I have the power, and you have to live with wanting something you can't have." Rebecca was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something that might have been respect mixed with fear. "You've changed," she said quietly. "Yes, I have. I learned how to protect myself from people like you. I learned how to build a life that can't be destroyed by someone else's jealousy or cruelty. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding, despite everything someone tried to do to stop you." She gathered her purse and coat, preparing to leave. "So that's it? You're going to keep the house forever just to spite me?" "I'm going to keep the house because it's mine, and because Jake and Maria are excellent tenants who deserve a stable home. Whether that spites you is entirely your choice." Rebecca stood up, her composure returning as she prepared to face the world outside the coffee shop. "Our parents are going to be devastated when they understand what's really been happening all these years. Maybe. Or maybe they'll finally realize that their perfect daughter isn't quite as perfect as they thought. Either way, that's not my problem anymore." She walked away without another word, her heels clicking against the tile floor. I finished my coffee and returned to my office, where I spent the rest of the afternoon working on a new software project that would eventually be worth more than Rebecca's dream house. That evening, I called Jake and Maria to check in on the property. They were thriving in the house, had just gotten engaged themselves, and were hoping to renew their lease for another year. I approved the renewal immediately and told them I'd keep their rent at the current rate as a wedding gift. 3 months later, I received a birth announcement from Rebecca and Todd. They had welcomed a daughter named Emma. The announcement included a professional photo of their new family in the living room of a different Victorian house, one they had eventually purchased in the Nob Hill neighborhood. It was a beautiful home, probably even more impressive than the Elm Street property. Rebecca looked genuinely happy in the photo, holding her baby daughter with Todd beaming beside her. I sent them a congratulations card and a generous gift for the baby. The truth is, I had never intended to keep the house forever out of spite. I had bought it to prove a point, that Rebecca couldn't control my life anymore, that I had become someone who couldn't be dismissed or manipulated. But as the years passed, I discovered something unexpected. Jake and Maria became more than just tenants. They became friends. They invited me to their wedding, asked for my advice when they started their own small business, and treated the house with genuine love and care. When their first child was born, they sent me photos of the nursery they had created in what Rebecca used to call the princess room. When their second child arrived, they asked if they could install a swing set in the backyard. Each time, I said yes, watching this young family build their dreams in the same space that had once represented Rebecca's obsessions. 5 years after buying the house, I realized that it had become something entirely different from what I had originally intended. It wasn't a weapon against my sister anymore. It was a home where good people were building a good life, and I was proud to be a part of that story. Rebecca and I eventually developed a civil relationship. We exchanged holiday cards, made polite conversation at family gatherings, and treated each other with the distant courtesy of former adversaries who had reached a peaceful stalemate. She never again tried to manipulate me or undermine my achievements. Whether that was because she had genuinely changed, or simply because she had learned I was no longer an easy target, I didn't particularly care. The house on Elm Street still generates excellent rental income and continues to appreciate in value. Jake and Maria eventually saved enough to buy their own home, and I helped them with the down payment as a parting gift. The new tenants, a retired professor and his artist wife, have transformed the garden into something that belongs in a magazine. Sometimes I drive by when I'm visiting Portland, just to see how the property is doing. It always looks beautiful, well-maintained, loved. It's exactly what a house should be. Not a symbol of power or revenge or childhood dreams, but a place where people build their lives and create their memories. And that, I think, is the best possible ending to this story. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.